This is the Raising Rebellion podcast, episode number 14.
Welcome to the Raising Rebellion Parenting Podcast, where we will explore how to help kids seek purpose and passion, challenge society's expectations, and avoid a standardized life. Now here's your host, Paul H.K.
Hello, Rebels. Thank you so much for being here. Such a fantastic conversation to share with you today. Today, I speak to artist and educator Chad Addy. We hear all the time that art is important to have in school and how art is always at risk of being cut because of budget constraints, but we don't hear so much about why it's so important. Chad talks about that why. He also talks about what he loves the most about being an art teacher, how inspiration manifests itself into creating his work, and how art can transform the way kids see and experience things in life. I think this conversation might open up some minds about art and hopefully even sway some parents to look at art a little differently after hearing Chad's perspective. It definitely did for me. Here's my interview with Chad. Okay, today we are speaking with artist and educator Chad Addy. Chad, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. My pleasure. All right, let's start at the very beginning if we could. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. Let's start at the very beginning if we could. Would you mind giving a little background, starting with your childhood, growing up, and a little bit about your journey to where you are today?
Okay. I was raised in Los Angeles. Had two very supportive parents. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by supportive is at an early age, I started making work. Mm-hmm. And I found that both of my parents were very supportive in terms of allowing me to educate myself so that I could pursue what I was doing, which started as art, I would say, at an early age, like maybe first grade was a direction for me, actually. Mm-hmm. So something I started getting interested in. Mm-hmm. And they would just, I would say, well, can I do this? And I would get a class or I would get books. I would go to different schools to study it. So that was sort of early childhood. And then at the same time, I was interested in acting a little bit later, maybe around 10. Mm-hmm. So I started to pursue that. Mm-hmm. And both things I started to develop. And I'm telling you that because later on it becomes kind of helpful to understand how I ended up where I'm at with the acting background.
Okay.
And how can I tell you? I mean, I kind of studied all over. I studied at Yale for a while, Northwestern for a while. And they were, really very supportive and proud. And it made it much easier to be an artist with two parents that really sort of admired my path.
Right.
At an early age. And I think even to today has meant a lot to me with my own kids and also as an educator.
Yeah. I mean, I think you nailed it. It's about the parents and about allowing the kids, supporting the kids to sort of explore and be able to find their own path. I mean, that's kind of what this whole podcast is about, right? How do we do that as parents? How do we support our kids as opposed to just kind of allowing society and the school system and outside influence to sort of dictate people's paths? Is I think most of us, that's what happens to most of us today. Now, let me ask you: Did your parents have any kind of artistic background? Were either of them like artists or actors? Did that influence you?
My grandmother was an artist. Uh-huh. There's a lot of artists and photographers and composers, but they're on the East Coast. So there's the the Addy sort of clan has sort of separated. I mean, they're all over, but mainly in the U.S. We're in New York and we're in L.A. And in New York, there's a lot of artists. There's my aunt is a painter. My uncle was a photographer. There's musicians. There's just like most of them on the East Coast are. Not most of them, but a good amount of them are. Here, there were none. And I think it's a good question because I was the black sheep. I mean, I came from a family of doctors and lawyers. And as supportive as my parents were, which was amazing in considering the family that I was surrounded with. And I have a very close family. Like every Friday night, you know, since I was a little kid, everyone would get together for Shabbat dinner. So I was around them all the time. And I really felt like an alien, you know, with my own family, because the course that they were taking and what they were really interested in was not at all what my life was about. So I think, but my parents were, you know, as I mentioned, very supportive. So it made it sort of bearable, I would say, to do what I was doing.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't know if that answered your question, but
yeah, no, absolutely.
So I knew, I mean, I guess the knowing that I did have aunts and uncles that had taken, like, that was their career, it helped. In other words, if everybody I was surrounded with, including New York, were also doctors and lawyers, I think it would have been, I mean, I still would have done it, but I think it would have been more difficult. But knowing that you have an aunt that's a professional painter and knowing that you have an uncle that's a professional photographer, it definitely is like, okay, this is something that you can actually do.
Yeah. And I think that probably helped, I'm going to guess, it probably helped with your parents being able to support you as well, because at least there was some exposure to that, right? It wasn't like it was totally
definitely. No, and I think also with my grandmother being an artist, I mean, she was a sculptor and a painter, and she did it her entire life. They loved her work. You know, it was a big part of my family, like my grandmother's work. Everybody had it. Everyone was involved in it. And she didn't do it professionally in that she wasn't selling it. She wasn't showing it. But it was, you know, she was the matriarch of this family, and everybody knew she was an artist. So that helped a lot.
Yeah, very cool. Now, you know, you mentioned that you sort of realized in the first grade, right?
Yeah. I think, you know, I started getting attention as an artist in the first or even kindergarten. Like I remember drawing. I mean, I remember even moments. I remember being in a class and making a drawing and having the teacher sort of highlight it to the other kids, and then they used it for something, and that feeling of like, wow, like people are looking at this and the other kids aren't doing this, and now they're putting it on the cover of this, that confirmation at an early age. And I actually remember the moment. Like I remember the desk I was sitting at.
Wow.
I remember kind of it's weird. It's a strange memory, but it was I remember the drawing even. And then from that moment on, it was sort of like, oh, okay, this is something I'm good at, and I actually feel really good doing it, and the attention felt good. So from that point on, it was something I really put a lot of energy into, and in a way was like, if you knew me in fifth grade, that would be sort of like what I did.
Right.
You know, like what I spent my time on and my energy on.
Right. You know, I remember being in summer camp, and there was one kid who constantly was walking around with a sketchbook in his hand. You know, didn't go anywhere without his sketchbook. And, the guy, that's what he always enjoyed doing, and you could tell because he carried around a sketchbook. We're up at a dirty, dusty summer camp, and the guy's walking around, you know. So I love that he, you know, loved it so much that he didn't care about what anybody else think. He was kind of a, little socially awkward, you know, kind of person, but to this day continues to create art, and he directs and all this kind of stuff. So it's pretty fantastic. I'm a little jealous that you were able to find something you're passionate about so early on and receive, you know, that sort of support so early on. You know, it's what I think all of us are sort of in search for, and as parents, what we hope to help our kids find to be able to support them in that in that journey, you know. So that's really fantastic. You found it so young.
Yeah, and I think with my own kids, it's something that I think about a lot also, just with my own two children. You know, and constantly meeting with parents, you know, parent-teacher conferences, that's sort of like the thing that parents are crying about, you know, that are just like, can you help them find that thing? And sort of like put it all on my shoulders. But yes, I hear that all the time. And I think it's a lot of pressure as a teacher because you know what it meant to you, and you do want to give that to kids. And you sometimes feel like you were a failure when they don't come out of your class with that, you know, like crystalline clear feeling. It is, at least for me as an educator, it's what you're sort of shooting for all the time, or at least, I guess at least shooting for it. I mean, obviously they're not going to all become artists, but if you can sort of create that glimmer of fascination in them, that's everything, you know, whether they do it for life or not, but just to give them that feeling of empowerment in them doing something that they feel they're good at and can communicate through is, to me, one of the main goals.
Yeah, that's great. And it's actually great to hear that parents are coming to you asking for your help in that specifically. You know, I would think that, you know, maybe a lot of parents just aren't thinking about that. They're really thinking more about, okay, can you help my kid, you know, get an A so that they can, you know, get into the right school that I want them to go to. And, you know, that's great to hear that you actually get the feedback from some parents that that's what they're looking for their kids. So that's awesome.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it. It's true. I don't think about that in that way, but it's true. Yeah. Sometimes I take for granted where I'm teaching, but
okay, now did you ever head down a different path to do something else?
So the answer to that is I think this is sort of where the transition takes place. So I think it's also an important little moment to mention. So around 14, I'm still sort of cultivating both things, right? I'm still acting and I'm still working on the drawing and painting. Yeah. But I get very sick at 14. I get shingles. And this was right before I started high school, so between 8th and 9th grade. And I didn't start high school right away because of it. And for anybody out there that doesn't know about shingles, it's usually hit somebody in their old age, and it is I don't know if they would call it, well, it is a virus that takes over your immune system. Your nervous system. And it's sort of a fascinating thing because at an early age, as a kid, I was very sort of emotional and very sort of, what's the best word for it? I mean, I'm still that, so I guess I would say very ruled by the senses. And the shingles it's fascinating now. It wasn't fascinating at 14, but basically it takes over all of your emotions. Wow. And the best way I can describe it is anything you feel love for gives you pain. Anything you feel excited about gives you pain. Anything like actual senses. So anything that is warm is painful. Anything that is, you feel like, so just if you feel fear, it's painful. So anything that is dictated by your nervous system actually gives you internal pain.
Oh my gosh.
So I naturally was that person. So if I allowed myself to be that person that I was, I would just be filled with an inferno of pain. So I had to shut down my actual emotions to get through this period of time. And I just remember like one moment where, there were all kinds of things. And again, I can remember everything about this because it stayed with me till today. And it's has a lot to do with, again, my teaching style and my work. But basically, if you came into the room, well, this actually happened. So my mom comes into the room and she was like, I don't remember the girl's name, and it was something like Annalisa. She was like, oh, Annalisa called for you. And I remember it just filled my body with pain. because knowing that somebody cared about me and was calling about me, it just riddled through my body like thousands of knives.
Right.
And so at that point, I was like, you cannot tell me anything. Like, you can't, like, anything that has to do with somebody looking into how I'm doing, that had to be shut down. So any kind of like love, you couldn't come into the room with a candle, because from 20 feet away, I would feel the warmth inside my body. So that's what I'm saying. It's a fascinating thing to go through. And at 14, the pain was by far the most intense, intolerable thing I had ever gone through. And I vowed if I got it again, I would take my life. Like, I did not want to go through this again physically. Mm-hmm. And I just never forgot. It just changed me. That was the game changer because after that point, I was like, when I get better, I'm going to do everything I want to do, because you just don't know when it's over, and you don't know what kind of pain you're going to go through, right. And life is too short. And so at 14, to have that kind of reality and that kind of experience, it just, like, I went, while I was in high school, it's like nothing was the same anymore. It was like, you need to do your work. Yeah. There is no time to waste. Like, whatever it was, if I was going to party, whatever, it just always kept me grounded, because it could all end. And of course, if I got it today, it would not be, I wouldn't take my life. Like, I could deal with it. But at that age, it just was too intense, and just, it opened my eyes to so many things, and it just made me feel like I needed to do what was essential in life and not mess around and, not become a banker or not become like all these other, in other words, I would not waste my time. I felt like I had something to say, and I was going to do whatever it took to say that thing as clearly as I possibly could. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. For that, for something like that, the worst possible thing that you could get, to somebody who was ruled by their senses, right? But I think you could also say, looking back, in a lot of ways, a great thing, because it sort of changed your perspective on life. And it's a shame that I think a lot of times we as human beings have to go through something that dramatic and that tough in order to sort of wake up, to experience and enjoy and appreciate and to do the things that we want to do in life. So in a lot of ways, I think it was a great thing that it happened that early too.
Yeah, in retrospect, I agree.
Right.
So that sort of seriousness, that's where, so you had asked like other channels. So I think at that point I was still acting and still did when I graduated, but then it came to the point where I was auditioning for things that just, to me, were a waste of time. And I had all of this sort of feeling inside me, which never left. And once the shingle was gone, I could, it was full throttle. I was allowed to feel, right? And I was, and what was essential to me was that I was saying everything I really needed to say, not somebody else's lines, not what a director wanted, not what, certain lighting. And art gave me that. So at that point, I switched gears, and it really became the vehicle for me really saying what I felt like I needed to say. If this was my last painting, and that's sort of how I've treated my whole career, is like, okay, this one I'm working on right now, this is it. There might not be anything else after this. So what do you have to say? Like, what has to be made? It's not about how much money you're going to make with the painting, but like, what do you need to make? Like, if it's over tonight, who are you?
Yeah.
And I couldn't do that as much in acting. So, again, the shingles, I would say, really affected that. And in my teaching too, it's, and with my kids, this is this question of what is essential. Does that tree need to be there? If this was, and that's a class that I teach, if this was your final painting, what is it going to be? You have 1 hour. What do you have to make?
Mm-hmm. So interesting. And I love the approach, it's, so let me ask you a big, broad question. Actually, kind of a few questions. So tell me, Tell me, in your definition, in your perspective, what is art? Why is it important to the artist, to yourself, and why is it important to society? I know, kind of three big questions, but in 5 minutes or less.
Okay. So your first one was, what is art? I'm going to come back to that one.
Okay.
The second one was, the third one was, why is it important to society? And the second one was,
why is it
what
important,
was the second one?
Why is it important to the artist?
Okay. So I think it's important to, I can't speak for everybody, obviously. So, there's every level and kind of person that is making work, but I'm going to speak more from where I'm coming from. I think it's important for the individual to make work, because hopefully it expresses who they are as a person, what they think about, what's important to them, what moves them, what their ideas are, what their history is. They want to create some sort of change. They want to affect people. They want to emote something. They want to change somebody's idea about something. They want to give you something you haven't seen before. Mm-hmm. They want to show. Let's just take the example of a shipwreck, okay, which is what I'm dealing with right now. So if I'm going to make a shipwreck, I want to show it to you in a way you've never seen it before. Mm-hmm. I want to show you something, and I want you to learn something, and I want you to feel something that is new. It's a new experience. It's hopefully coming from an honest place in the artist. And for me, I want you to feel something. I want you to think something. I want to change your view of something when you come into that space and experience this work. I want you to have an experience. Mm-hmm. And I want it to affect you. Other artists, it might just be completely intellectual. Right. They're going to put a sentence on the canvas and they want you to think about this sentence in a new way. So, others, it might be to, James Turrell, we've been looking at a lot, your experience of light. Mm-hmm. He might alter how you experience light, and then hopefully in the future you're, walking through MacArthur Park, and then all of a sudden you register or you see something you hadn't seen before because of that, maybe that eye-opening experience with his work. So it's engaging you in a way that is hopefully opening up some channel in you, and hopefully creating some sort of change in you. Something that it's not just an experience for that moment, but I can, for myself, there are artists, and I can tell you the day, I can tell you who I was with, I can tell you, I'm just thinking about the Jewish Museum, looking at these Chaim Soutine paintings, crumpled on the ground, just hysterically crying, because and it was a carcass of beef, but the way he used the paint, visceral sort of the ferocity of his approach, it was so moving to me and it just went right through me. Something I will never forget. I could not move away from the work, and it killed me how good it was. And it just completely spoke to me. And that I want to give that to people. That's what I'm saying. Every artist is different. I want the viewer to be in front of the work and not be able to escape it. Yeah. To be eaten alive by a work and have that work sort of confront the viewer and question their own life. But that's where I'm coming from, and so I want to deliver. For me, if a work isn't in that place, it's sort of a failure. Mm-hmm. So I need to go through that myself to make it. And and it won't speak to everybody, and I'm not looking for sort of mass market appeal, but I am looking to connect to those people that experience life maybe in that way, or could possibly, maybe they're not that person, but it does, like I was saying, open up a channel for them to experience something like this. So I hope that answers the question of why I'm making it. And for me, it's essential. I guess that's the other thing, is I'm personally making the work, because if I am going down today, I want to feel that this, I need to put my stamp on, this is who I was, and this is how I feel about life, and this is how I feel about relationships, and this is how I feel about family. And it's a document.
Yeah.
And I think the last question was, why is it important? Was that what it was?
The other ones were, why do you think art is important to greater society? And
okay,
I think you
let's
kind
stop
of answered
with that one.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, so, with that one, I think I kind of did. I think hopefully it's moving society forward in some way. By forward, I think it's important for artists to create work that is not only vital today, but, so if they're making work that's vital today, hopefully it is saying something that has not been said before. Mm-hmm. So it's fresh, it's alive, it's not just somebody's document, but it's document based on there is a structure that it is building upon. In other words, you can go from the cave paintings, and you can go to Goya, and you can go to El Greco, and you can go to Titian. And so there is a scaffolding that is being built over the years. And that's why education is so, we'll get to this hopefully at some point, but to me, to educate of what has happened before is so critical, because if you don't, you are potentially making work that's really important to you, but might not be speaking to anybody else, because they've already seen it. Mm-hmm. And they've already felt it. And so it's not just about creating sort of an outpouring of work, but hopefully it's an outpouring of work that there is some lineage. It's connected to some, Picasso built and built and built on top of, work that had been created before. And each time he's trying to beat it. He's like, okay, I'm going to glean this. I'm going to recite this, or I'm going to appropriate this, but I'm going to take it to a higher level. Mm-hmm. And I think that is such an important, component, because that's bringing society to another place. It's not just staying in a stagnant position, but it's really raising it up to the next level and the next level and the next level.
Yeah. Yep.
And I think that's what the great artists will do.
Yep.
They're going to show you something you have not seen before in a totally new light, and that's going to make you feel something. Mm-hmm. And so you're saying for society, I think that's critical. You don't want to be stagnant. You want to be continuously moving forward and to a higher plane. And that's what an artist can do.
Yeah. Yeah. I think about, art, I think we take it for granted a lot. I think it's out in our society, and it's sort of embedded in our everyday thought a lot more than we realize. Mm-hmm. And I do think it helps move society forward. I think it's absolutely critical and crucial that we have it in our lives. And, because it does make you think, it makes you think out of the box. It makes you think about what's possible, makes you think in ways that you didn't realize that were even possible before. So yeah, it's, I think it's important. I think we're going to get into, I'm, going to ask you a little bit more about, how that is incorporated into schools, in a little bit here. But, I want to go back to one point you made earlier, which was that you were kind of feeling like an alien, to use your word, right? For kids, especially at a young age, right, before they've even really figured out who they are, their own self-identity, to feel like an alien and a little bit of an outsider, and you feel like you're supposed to fit in with the way other people are acting and doing things. How do you think you sort of were able to come to terms with that and just sort of embrace who you were? Was it a little bit more than just I know you said you had a great support system in your parents, but what do you think that was, and what other kids can maybe think about if they're feeling
again, great question. So I remember when I was studying acting, so I was studying one summer at Yale, and I started making these murals. I made one sort of in someone's room, and they said, hey, would you make me one in my room? So I started making these sort of like floor to ceiling, 9 feet high by like 15 feet, in the entire, there were 4 people staying in this dorm room, these massive murals.
Wow.
And then people just started wanting them. And that, in other words, I guess what I'm trying to tell you is the confidence is what made the difference to me. Mm-hmm. Like, I didn't care what people thought of me. Like, I didn't care how it was looking that I was dressed, because I knew there was a power in this work. Mm-hmm. And after making the work and the effect that it had on people gave me, so the work itself, I guess just having enough confidence to make the work, right? Believing in it from that early age. And then actually starting to make the work and seeing how the work affected people gave me a confidence, and it gave me a certain strength and ability to be different from other people. Mm-hmm. I think also literature helped. I started reading a lot at an early age, and just finding in Dostoevsky and Tolstoy. For some reason, I was always drawn to the Russians. I started reading maybe like around 14. I started reading really all the Russians, because it just was very in line with the way I was thinking. Mm-hmm. That also gave me a confidence. Like, okay, I was in a very wealthy high school, okay, with kids that were just, parents were actors and doing drugs and all stuff wasn't who I was. Mm-hmm. And a combination of like having these great writers write about stuff that actually meant something to me. It just spoke to me. Mm-hmm. And much more, not much more than artwork, but much more than maybe a lot of artists that I was finding. And then some music, it just was like, wow, there's other people out there like me. Yeah, maybe I'm not in school with them, but, do I connect with Nabokov? Yeah, I really do. Do I connect with what Dostoevsky is saying and walking through these streets of Leningrad? I did. And it was like, okay, I can be totally alone. I can work on my drawings. I can read this. I don't need to do all that other stuff. I don't need to do the drugs. And I also knew the loneliness that I felt, which I did. Okay, I'm not going to tell you I didn't. I did. Mm-hmm. But part of me, in a way, started to embrace it. Mm-hmm. I started to just know that what I needed to do was make work that was important to me. And whether I was lonely or not and not doing that stuff, I just sort of accepted it. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that answers your question, but I remember just those feelings of the same, being an alien in this high school I was in. Mm-hmm. And I had one foot in the sort of the social scene. I was friends with these kids, but I never really felt like I belonged. I was much happier just sort of like doing the work.
Right. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, can you, when you're starting a piece of work, can you tell me a little bit about your process? First of all, maybe can you explain what inspiration is, right? I'm assuming it starts with something that you get inspired about, and that kind of gets your mind racing about the different things that you can do, right? Can you explain to me what inspiration is to you?
Okay. So I think I'm inspired by a lot of things, and I think that I would say, again, I'm sort of inspired by a lot of the same themes I was inspired by as a kid, which is kind of interesting. So I'm still working from a lot of these themes of things that I might have read, Homer's Odysseus, the Odyssey. I started reading it, maybe I was 16. I'm still working from it. So this sort of journey, it just becomes richer, and it becomes, more about my life now. At that time, it was sort of how I viewed things. So it's a lot of the themes are the same. And I think for me, I use, again, a lot of literature that I fell in love with, but I'm retelling the tales with my own personal experiences, my own loss, my own loves, my own children, my own sense of identity. And I might just use Odysseus's ship as the vessel to explore these themes. One thing I notice, and I teach a lot, is the deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper you can go into that subject and internalize it and dream about it and find it in your everyday life. And what I mean by deeper is like the further away you can go from the original, sort of like just digging these holes and play. And what I mean by play is like really have fun with it. Like just like all in 100%, just not knowing where it's going to end up. The play part is just like digging the holes. Like you have whatever, you're at the beach and you're just digging holes, and you know that the piece is going to be about this boat, but you have no idea. You're close to the water, okay? So you're sort of like in the zone. You're in the region you should be. The sea is there. The hole could be just this journey. And what starts to happen is you find something. You're digging. All of a sudden you find a little shell. And then you study that shell and you're like, wow, wait a minute. I'm going to look at this in the light. And I see now, while I'm moving the shell around, there's sort of this sort of shimmery, pearlescent tone. And then all of a sudden, that gives you an idea. So you're like, oh my God, I'm going to create this boat in this beautiful sort of like smoky pink sky. And it's going to be, coming to this island. So what I'm saying is, the more curious you can be, the more you can trust that place is going to continue to give you information, and the more you can be open to whatever you find in that hole. And not in a fixed mindset, but like a totally open mindset, then the things themselves can give you ideas. So put yourself in the place and start mining, and and you also have to be really agile in that moment, right? Mentally. Right. Because you have to be like, Nijinsky, an incredible dancer, to be able to move, or like Picasso, to be able to move in multiple directions based on what you find in that hole. To me, that's one of the keys to keep the work fresh, because sometimes I teach a class on going to a thrift store and finding something that your eye connects to, whatever. Let's just say it's a tapestry, okay? And part of a Moroccan rug, let's just say. Somebody just maybe a Moroccan rug. No, let's just say a crocheted scene of a man and a woman at a wedding. Okay, catches your eye. You grab that. By studying that thing and being curious about that thing, a new idea comes to you that you never could have predicted. Because you wouldn't have thought about crochet, you wouldn't have thought about the man, whatever. It was sewn by somebody in 1960. And then based on those colors, you start to come up with, do you understand what I'm saying? It's sort of like you get ideas from being curious about the things that surround you. And of course, you have to know what you're drawn by or drawn to. But then it's unlimited. And if you're curious, and a big thing with me is just this curiosity. Is I think that people just overall are not curious enough. So if you become curious about everything, the inspiration is never going to stop. Because it could be a cone on the street. It could be an ice cream cone wrapper that's on the ground, and all of a sudden I've based paintings on Japanese. I mean, there was this painting I had, Japanese Peanut Girl, which was based entirely on a little plastic wrapper of a Japanese peanut company, and it had this really beautiful sort of image of almost like a childlike geisha, like that was reversed. And I took that, put it in my journal, studied the color combinations, studied the writing. That became a painting. That just was being curious about a scrap on the ground. So that's a lot of what I try to teach my own kids, is just being aware and open. And it's a lot of what I'm teaching in the classroom, because some kids that just don't know where the inspiration comes from, to me, you just got to be curious about it all. And then your personality will take over. You know, you start to realize, wait a minute, I am kind of into this color, or I'm starting to realize I am sort of into these shapes for whatever reason. Let's look at what that is about.
I think that's fantastic. That I plan on asking you about that a little bit later, but I was going to ask you, so other than actual technique of how to make something, you're really teaching more about the approach and, to think about things in a different way. And again, I think this is why art is so important in schools. It's not just about putting a paintbrush to a paper plate and, making something. It's about being able to think about things in a different way, is what
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that, one thing you just said, but it is critical, is it's a balance between teaching the skill. Like, let's just say it's etching. You cannot make an extraordinary etch based on your life's, essence if you do not have the confidence of how to etch. So that balance is critical. In other words, you can't, it's that famous quote from Picasso that he's studied the first half of his life, and then the second half of his life he worked on forgetting everything he had learned. So he needed to get the skills. He needed that discipline. He needed to study it. But then, like an incredible dancer, it's in you. You need to. That's the point. You need to then dance. In a minute, it's just got to be there. So to give them that confidence first in the skill, whatever the medium is, and then work with them to destroy that etching so it's not so precious anymore, and it comes into a place where it's just totally 100% from them, and also something really new, an etching like we've never seen before. So I think that balance is critical. I mean, it's critical definitely for me in the teaching, because I know they'll be just terrified. I mean, the fearlessness is a big part for me in terms of the teaching. Like, how do you teach that fearlessness? One way to do it is you've got to give them the skill first.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming that you get a lot of students that have been raised, throughout their lives up until the point that they meet you in your classroom, to, sort of be thinking about things in a certain way. And a lot of that is probably, partially by the school that they went to previously, but also, from their home, right? How they go about, how they were taught to think in their homes. So, for you to present sort of an artist's viewpoint of how to look at things, I would guess would be a little bit more challenging for some kids to sort of understand that as opposed to others. Do you think?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, very insightful of you. And I mean, I've seen it year after year after year. I've seen it from kids that have, usually I try to do this for as long as I can, but let's just say the first 2 to 3 weeks is all just about experience, not about, like what I was saying, technique at all. It's really just breaking down, just getting to the core of just seeing and experiencing and forgetting about anything else, but just being curious and just taking walks together and questioning them, and how do you feel about this light, or what's going on here, all that stuff. Either kids drop out of the class because they're looking at me like, what the hell is going on here? Like what you're saying, like, I was not raised with this.
Right.
What does any of this have to do with art? What the hell is he talking about? And get me out of this class as quick as you can, Mom and Dad. So, I mean, yes, I see it in their eyes, right? I see it right away. And I don't necessarily prepare them for it. I'm not like, hey, hang in there a couple weeks. I just sort of, I don't know. I probably should more, but I don't, because I'm so exhausted after those first couple days. But I see it, and then, I get that note where, can I please sign this? Going to be moving to ceramics or whatever it is. But then the ones that hang on, and this to me is one of the greatest. This is one of the things I really love about teaching, is those ones that are from that family, that this is a total foreign language. Like what I'm talking about, they have never heard before, and I'm speaking a language they never heard. Those kids that hang on, that to me is like one of the most exciting things, because if they can, I just love what comes out of them, and I love seeing that sort of ship turn around and just move in another direction, and at some point kind of become quietly fearless. And then those kids, to me, it means so much to, and I've seen it so many times. It's like, I guess for me, that's one of the most important things about teaching, is hitting those kids that they never would have had me as a teacher, coming from where they came from, coming from that family. Being an artist was not a possibility.
Yep.
And it still might, you and I've talked about this before, it still might not be, but to change the way they see things for their life, whether it was for math or for reading or for becoming a novel, whatever it is, like, this is just a different way of experiencing life. And I don't know that it would have happened, maybe it would happen much later in life, but for me, I want to try to reach them as soon as I can, because I know what it meant to me as a kid. And I also know they might never have had that opportunity. And I just love it. I love it when I see it. Yeah. And I love it when they come back, multiple years. Like, I had them early on, and I saw that look, and then, I have them, continuing. I have them in 8th grade and 9th grade and 10th grade. I just love it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You keep answering questions that I'm planning on asking you later. It's like you're a mind reader. I think one of the great things about art is that you learn to look like you just said. You learn to look at things a different way. It's not like you have to be an artist. It's not like you're going to become an artist just by taking this one class. The idea is to take sort of a perspective from an artist and the way that they look at things, and apply that to whatever it is you might be doing in life. And I think that just opens up so many different avenues and ways of thinking and a different perspective about it. I think it would be so beneficial for people to look at it in that way. It's not like, oh, well, I'm not going to be an artist. I'm going to drop this class. Right. It's, I just think it's so beneficial in so many different intangibles that you walk away with, with art.
Just that openness alone, what I mean? Just to live in a place where you're just open to the way somebody else is going to be thinking, or the way you could possibly be, to come at things from multiple directions, limitless directions, is so important in life. Whatever it is. Yeah. You're at a job and, it's not working the way you want it to work.
Yeah.
Okay, now we're going to move this direction.
Right.
But I love this this little clip of a film where Bruce Lee, and I sometimes play this to students when I remember, but he's talking about, well, one, I love Bruce Lee, but he's talking about his sort of philosophy on martial arts, and he says, like, whatever, the guy asks him what his philosophy is, and he's saying that he really aspires to be like water.
Yeah.
And his example was, that the water, this sort of rush of water down a stream, when it hits a rock, it just moves. And it's so agile, and it just wraps around, like whatever comes to it. it's just going to be this sort of beautiful, seamless stream that is just this extraordinary dancer that it doesn't matter what the obstacle is. It is going to move in a totally new direction based on that shape, that sort of organic shape. And that is a lot of what I want to try to be teaching.
Yeah.
To give them that.
I love that Bruce Lee black and white clip, Be Like Water, as well.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. And how deep was Bruce Lee as a philosopher back in the day?
Oh my God.
Right, man.
God, that guy was amazing.
Tons of clips of him philosophizing about different things.
Yeah.
Just pretty incredible.
Yeah.
I think, having sort of a non-linear path, I think probably scares a lot of parents, is what I'm going to guess. I was talking to another parent at school one time, and, she told me that she had one daughter currently at school, but she also had an older daughter who had graduated. And I asked what that older daughter did, and the mom kind of hesitated. She sort of wasn't sure if she wanted to tell me, was sort of the sense I got. And then she told me that she was a working actress. And then she, over the course, I was asking her about it, and she emphasized to me and had to make a point of telling me more than once that her daughter was a working actress. She was working. She was working, And I was thinking about it after the fact, and I was sort of trying to analyze it. It sort of felt like it was partially coming from sort of a parental worry for their kid, and part maybe worrying about what I was going to think about her daughter being an actress in Los Angeles or whatever. And I think that part of it was probably that I think her daughter being an actress made her very uncomfortable, and that maybe she hadn't really come to terms with it herself, So, and that her kid's going to be a starving artist, right?
Right.
So, have you ever been a quote unquote starving artist, whatever that means?
Yeah. Whatever that means. I think. Well, I will say this. I started selling the work pretty early on. When I mean early on, like maybe 18. Okay, started selling on some level or making work from it. Making money from it. But that doesn't mean I was living on it at all. But I think those moments where I would sell something, plus I would always work. In other words, I never was one of those people that was like, okay, well, I'm just going to live on this work and that's it, and I'm not going to do any other job. I had a strong work ethic. I started a regular job when I was my first job. I was 13, just a regular job, like in a restaurant. I was actually kind of a cook. So I started just working, making my own money at an early age, and I knew if I was going to, for a profession, be an artist, I needed also to really just work. And not have the ego of where I was working, which I think is really important. I think it's important to have that resilience and to just know it's going to be a battle. It's not going to be easy for many, many different reasons. And I think I saw so many people, so many friends leave the business and do something else. In other words, they, friends that were writers, that were poets, that were painters, that slowly, as the years went on, shifted to something that was safer, shifted to something that was not, okay, well, I'm not going to, write the poems anymore. Now I'm going to sort of write copies for commercials, or now it's not really copies for commercials, but I'm going to kind of work on this other end of it.
Right.
And I think it's also a really good question, because I think that what happens is you have to have complete it's not like there's something else you can do. It has to be what you absolutely need to do. And if it's not, you're going to eventually segue into something else.
Yep.
And for me, that's been it's not sad. It's a reality, but I think an early age, one, that going back to that shingles experience, two, going back to the support of my parents, and three, going back to that I didn't care. There was a part of me is this like, this is what life is for you. You might not have the money that other people have. You might not have the life that other people have, but is this more important to you? And I think, so there were a lot of years, where I was partly teaching and partly partly selling, but I knew it was going to be difficult, and it was for a lot of years. I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah. But I think that it sort of segued into something else, and it is something I really try to also teach is like there's just all kinds of lessons that you really need to know going into it that are going to help you when you are, hungry and it is difficult. It's like, how important is this really to you? Because if it is, you're going to have that discipline, and you're going to not have a lot of other things that other people have. And that's going to come with the territory. And if you don't like it, go into something else. Because it might take years.
Now, let me ask you another question. Is it hard for you to sell your work? Is it hard for you to part with something that you have put just everything into and to sell it for money? Is that tough?
Yeah, sometimes and sometimes not. I think what happens with me is when I first make it, it is difficult because it's your youngest baby and you just made it and it's just fresh and it's closest to what you are going through right now, and you want to see it go to the right place. You're not really ready to let it go because you haven't had enough time with it, and you maybe cried through it and fought with it, and you're just not, you can't say goodbye to it yet. But as time goes on, maybe it's a year, maybe it's 5 years, you want to see it go. You want to see it go to the right place. Depending on the work, you do want to see it placed in the right, you don't want it in somebody's closet, because no one's going to see it. And that is also important. You think about what the placement of the work is going to be. But I've struggled with that many times. I mean, there's been works that some people wanted to buy and I wasn't ready to sell it. And I kind of now in retrospect wish I had, because now I still have it. So, I think, it's just a matter of time, I think. And also I work a lot. I make a lot of work, so I really have to let the work go. Otherwise I have the greatest collection of my own work, which it can be difficult. Right. Storage wise.
Right. Then you're paying to keep it.
Let me know if you have any storage, by the way, because I need some.
Okay, we'll do. Maybe that's a new business. Maybe I'll start storage for artists. Yeah. Now tell me, I think we already touched on this a little bit, but tell me the different kinds of things that you think you can teach your students, other than the actual technique, to etch or to paint or whatever. What kinds of things do you look to impart on your students? I know you talked about it a little bit already. But.
Yeah. Okay. So one is fearlessness.
Yeah.
I think to be a really great artist, in my book, fearlessness and just not being afraid to go onto ground that no one has walked on.
Yep.
That's maybe the most important. It's not, I'm going to put it in the sort of the top three. And that is a hard thing to teach. I think that's taught a lot of different ways. There's a class that I teach where I just do it in a lot of different ways. But I tend to do a lot of it at the beginning when I'm first working with a group, like, construct a temple out of just these 3 sheets of paper. And that's it. Like, you don't get scissors, you don't get glue. You're forced in the confines, you're forced with this limitation to sort of construct something that is an extraordinary structure. And the brain and the person has to be resourceful beyond. They have to figure out how it can rise up without any of those other things they would usually grab. So it's forcing them into a spot and they have an hour to do it. So there's a time limitation, there's a material limitation, and it's sort of, it's sink or swim. And I think what happens is with enough of these, they start to just all that self-doubt was like, oh my God, I can't do that. How am I going to? You just start to do it. And maybe not right away. Maybe there's one girl in the class that just takes it to as far as it can go. She construct whatever. She goes all of a sudden to the sink, because I didn't say anything about water, right? I didn't say you couldn't use water. So she goes to the sink and she starts dousing her 3 papers, and she all of a sudden tears them up into 350 little pieces, and then she starts stacking those 350. I mean, they see that. They see the one girl, and sometimes so there's 2 things that I think happen. One, I won't model that, but I'll model the conversation. I will do something drastic, or I'll use an example of like, okay, let's say I dragged in a peach tree in here, and I said, okay, I want you to make a self-portrait, and all you can use is a peach tree. And how are you going to do it? And I might say, okay, so let's say I was in this class. I'm going to take the skin off of this peach, and all I can use is my hands. I'm going to take the skin off of the peach, and I'm going to unravel it, and I'm going to try to make strips of it, and that's going to be the exterior. That's going to be sort of the outline of the face, and then I'm going to, with my hands, sort of start scraping the bark off, and the bark is going to be used as the hair, and then maybe I'm going to take the leaves, and I'm going to try really squeezing them, mix it with a little water to see if I can get some sort of green tone. I'm going to put a green shirt. So I'm giving them something that is not the actual project, because I don't want to give them ideas for the project, but I'm just telling them in terms of thinking, there is nothing that is going to stop my doing this, even if I have no tools. And I'm going to squeeze every ounce that I can from this tree in a new way to create this thing. And then there'll be one girl in the class, or 3 girls in the class, that will just knock it out of the park. And those girls on the second day will see that one girl that took all those little shreds of paper in the water, and she didn't, she all of a sudden was like resourceful in her mind, thinking, okay, there's a sink in here. You didn't say we couldn't use water. And then they'll start to change. They'll start to realize there's multiple ways of doing this, and nobody's going to hold their hand. They're just going to have to do it. And they're going to have to use their past history. They're going to have to use things that they've thought about and, that they've seen when they were somewhere. And over weeks of working this way and questioning them and sort of forcing them to think in a different way, and sometimes showing them artists that have done it in different ways, like I'm thinking of this artist, Muñez, I think he's Cuban, that would work with peanut butter and jelly, and made an image of the Mona Lisa, and one was in jelly and one was in peanut butter. So it does, the materials are multiple. The approach is multiple. There's no one way of doing it. It's not their mom was like, oh, can you teach them, to paint in this exact way? And this is, that might be where they're coming from, but I'm not going to allow that. So I think, I don't even remember where this question began. I know I'm at peanut butter and jelly right now, but where in the world did we start? I think you were saying...
the different things that you teach your students.
Oh, yeah, you were saying the course. So the fearlessness, I think that fearlessness is what is so exciting in work, Yeah. And then I think discipline is so important and so difficult today with, cell phones and texting and Vine and Facebook and all that crap that they're seeing. How do you get back to just making a drawing? Like actually just taking the time to just sit and study something for an hour. And this is another thing that I do at the very beginning. Study something just uninteresting. We've talked about this. A block of wood. A chip of wood. A wood chip in the garden. That's it. Pick it up. We're going to look at that wood chip. And then that wood chip becomes extraordinary. After they spend that time with it, studying the lines, studying the light on it, studying the texture, holding it in their hand, they hopefully can see it in a totally new way. And then, my God, it all becomes interesting. And it's not about all this crap that they're looking at, but the discipline is critical. And, I have 2 young kids. I see all that internet, all that stuff. I mean, I talk to them about it weekly, about getting rid of that stuff and getting back to the basics. And I try to do that with them. It's hard to just talk about it and lecture, but we're not, today, here's where we're going, and it's going to be just an experience. So the discipline, and then the curiosity.
Yep.
The curiosity, I'm going to throw in there technique. Okay. Just so we've got it out of the way. That's, I've said that earlier. That's important. Whatever that medium is, the technique. So the curiosity to me is, I usually say, like, the most important of all these things, because if they have that, if they're truly interested in all these things, it's just, everything is going to become interesting. They're going to become interesting people. They're not going to become closed. They're going to become open. They want to learn about whatever it is. If it goes back to that piece of bark of wood, I talk to them all the time while they're eating their crackers. Where do those crackers come from? Let's look at the label. How do they make the cracker? Let's go to the factory and just for the class, just study the factory.
Yeah.
Like, where are the crackers coming down from? Where do they? And I just think all of that stuff, you were asking me before about inspiration. That's where it comes from. Just being curious. And then their minds are open and they're like, wow, wait a minute. What if I did a painting and all the material was just from this crack? I ground up crackers. I didn't use any paint. You see, they're open then. There's not one way of doing it. There's multiple ways of doing it. And then what kind of feeling would the cracker give the painting? Or that it wouldn't have if I just used watercolor? Well, all of a sudden it's got this graininess. It's got this texture. It's got this tactile quality. It's got this actual smell of salt and flour coming together. And then all of a sudden, wow, what if I used scents in this work, And then we could look at artists that actually used scents in work, Ed Ruscha, who created a chocolate room. So it's a mixture of things. It's sort of like opening them up to the limitless possibilities of an experience or a way of showing an experience or a feeling, and then bringing in artists that have already hit it out of the park themselves at that time, right? We can't repeat it, so we got to know what's been come before, and then how are we going to beat it? How are we going to take it further? That's what I'm interested in. That's what I'm interested in teaching. That's what I'm interested in 30 years down the road. They are, whatever that job is, or not even in that job, in how they're going to be with their kids, or when they go to the Grand Canyon, how they're experiencing it. Just present and curious and open and unique.
Yep. That's a great perspective. I could easily talk to you for a couple more hours about this stuff, but I do want to be respectful of your time. I think that's a great place to kind of stop right there. But let me ask you one last question, if I could. This question is the last question I ask of all the people that I talk to. It's about, the podcast is called Raising Rebellion. And, the rebellion is, how do we help our kids think differently to be able to aid them in their journey to go explore and to go find the thing that lights them up, as opposed to just, simply taking a non-hands approach of throwing them through the system of school, job, career, right? How do we help them find that purpose and to live an extraordinary life? What advice can you give to parents who might be listening on how to become a successful rebel in life?
Okay. One thing I think is important is to listen and to watch. And to not have your own expectations get in the way of what you're actually standing in front of. And I'm just thinking about my little girl who's a dancer, and not wanting her, imposing on her what it is that I want her to do or become, but looking at her and seeing what moves her from the early age. Like, what are those signs? Like we were talking about curiosity, me being curious about really being present with her and thinking, where is she going? Watching, sometimes it's the parent that can maybe see it better than the child. Right. And I think with her, just watching her move and seeing, like you were talking about, how do you find that thing? So with her, I've seen her dance from an early age, but now I've seen an emotive quality in the dance, that she's speaking through it. And so as the parent watching that, I want to sort of knock down every wall that I can to provide her a space and the freedom to explore that thing and figure out if that's what it is. And maybe, maybe that leads to something else. But as the parent, I feel that's my responsibility. I want to give her those classes. I want to give her that room. I want to create that environment for her to feel fearless and loved and expressive and joyful doing that thing. So I think, and that involves education. Okay, so I think the first step would be sort of watching and listening, and the second step would be giving her the tools to educate herself. And that's one thing that comes to mind. I think also stressing, at least for me, that life is not about making a lot of money. It's not going to be what's going to bring them happiness. It's going to be that thing that we're talking about, that sort of spark that brings them that joy. And the money will come, if you're doing that thing that is so important to you. Mm-hmm. People are going to notice that. People want to be around that. People, like you're saying, everybody wants passion in life. They want to be surrounded by it. They want to bask in it. They want to watch it. It makes them feel alive, even if it's not us. If we're watching a dancer on stage or a performer on stage that is totally in that zone, you want to be as close to that as possible. And I think that's an important lesson for them, in that if they can find that thing, it'll play out. Like, they will hire you. You'll be happy. I just think that's an important thing for me to instill in them. Okay. It's not just about the dollar sign. I also think that as a parent, it's important to model that freedom. It's not just about, in other words, I try as much as I can with them to just to take them places and experiencing things with them, and I don't know how to explain it, but just like go out in the wind, you know what I mean? Go see the full moon, like at 3 a.m, like just to kind of have that experience of like not being tired, and to just be present for them, not like a child, but just like that thing I was talking to you about, where it's just the core of life. Like if this was our last night together, even like, what do we got to do? Don't save it for tomorrow, but let's just go do it. Yep. And I think that sort of freedom and that, in a sense, kind of wildness, I think also opens them up to just doing and being free. And that's sort of what children lose as the years go on, and they get more and more closed and sort of like ushered down a certain direction. I think by the parent expressing and experiencing with them this sort of wildness and joy keeps them in that space too, that this is okay. It's an okay way to be and live. Does that make sense? It's a hard thing to explain. No, it's very hard, and I think you did a great job. It's absolutely love it. Love your perspective. I think you nailed it on the head several times in there. So fantastic. Okay, he is Chad Addy. He's an artist and an educator. Chad, I can't tell you how fantastic it has been to chat with you. Like I said, I could easily chat with you for a couple more hours and just hanging out and just talking about this stuff. It's so great. Love hearing your perspective, and I know you're busy, and I really appreciate you taking the time to chat and to share your story and your perspective with our audience. So thank you very much. Well, thank you. It's a pleasure. I really enjoyed it. And till the next time. Okay, have a great evening.
Okay, you too, Chad. Talk to you later.
Thank you. Bye.
RaisingRebellion.com is where you can find all of our podcast episodes, show information, and sign up for our mailing list. If you're enjoying the podcast, please share with other Rebel parents that you think might enjoy it too. But most of all, I appreciate you listening, and I hope you're finding some helpful information for your journey. Thank you very much for being here, and until next time, go Rebs.